Lijep pozdrav, dragi moji, dobrodošli u novu lekciju vašeg konverzacijskog engleskog. U današnjoj lekciji imate priliku testirati svoje znanje koje ste imali priliku steći u prethodne dvije lekcije kada smo kroz glagol live učili oblike za simple present tense, odnosno obično sadašnje vrijeme u engleskom jeziku. Nadam se da ste spremni. Idemo. Ja živim. I live. I live. Ja živim u Bosni. I live in Bosnia. I live in Bosnia. Živim sa svojim roditeljima. I live with my parents. I live with my parents. Živim sam ili sama. I live alone. I live alone. Ne živim. I don't live. I don't live. Ne živim u kući. I don't live in a house. I don't live in a house. Živim u stanu. I live in an apartment. I live in an apartment. Ne živim sa roditeljima. I don't live with my parents. I don't live with my parents. Ti živiš. You live. You live. Da li ti živiš? Do you live? Do you live? Da, živim. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Ne, ne živim. No, I don't. No, I don't. Da li živiš sa svojim roditeljima? Do you live with your parents? Do you live with your parents? Ukoliko želimo dodati još uvijek, onda će rečenica glasiti Do you still live with your parents? Do you still live with your parents? Ne, ne živim sa svojim roditeljima. No, I don't live with my parents. Ukoliko želimo reći ne živim više sa svojim roditeljima, onda ćemo dodati na kraju anymore. Pa ćemo reći No, I don't live with my parents anymore. No, I don't live with my parents anymore. Živim sa svojim dečkom. I live with my boyfriend. I live with my boyfriend. Živim sa svojom djevojkom. I live with my girlfriend. I live with my girlfriend. Živim sa svojim suprugom. I live with my husband. I live with my husband. Živim sa svojom suprugom. I live with my wife. I live with my wife. Zar ti ne živiš sa svojim roditeljima? Don't you live with your parents? Don't you live with your parents? Živiš sa svojim roditeljima, zar ne? You live with your parents, don't you? You live with your parents, don't you? Ne živiš još uvijek sa svojim roditeljima, zar ne? You don't still live with your parents, do you? You don't still live with your parents, do you? Zar ne živiš sa svojim najboljim prijateljem? Don't you live with your best friend? Don't you live with your best friend? Živiš sam, zar ne? You live alone, don't you? You live alone, don't you? Ne živiš sam, zar ne? You don't live alone, do you? You don't live alone, do you? Zar ti ne živiš sam? Don't you live alone? Don't you live alone? Ne, ne živim. Živim sa svojim sinom. No, I don't. I live with my son. No, I don't. I live with my son. Gdje živiš? Where do you live? Where do you live? S kim živiš? Who do you live with? Who do you live with? Mi živimo. We live. We live. Mi ne živimo. We don't live. We don't live. Mi ne živimo u gradu. We don't live in a city. Or we don't live in the city. Živimo na selu. We live in the country. We live in the country. Živimo u predgrađu. We live in the suburbs. We live in the suburbs. Vi živite. You live. You live. Vi ne živite. You don't live. You don't live. Da li vi živite? Do you live? Do you live? Da, mi živimo. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Ne, mi ne živimo. No, we don't. No, we don't. Da li vi živite zajedno? Do you live together? Do you live together? Zar vi ne živite zajedno? Don't you live together? Don't you live together? Vi živite zajedno, zar ne? You live together, don't you? You live together, don't you? Vi ne živite zajedno, zar ne? You don't live together, do you? You don't live together, do you? Oni žive. They live. They live. Oni ne žive. They don't live. They don't live. Žive li oni? Do they live? Do they live? Da, oni žive. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Ne, oni ne žive. No, they don't. No, they don't. Zar oni ne žive u Sarajevu? Don't they live in Sarajevo? Don't they live in Sarajevo? Ne, oni ne žive u Sarajevu, žive u Tuzli. No, they don't live in Sarajevo, they live in Tuzla. No, they don't live in Sarajevo, they live in Tuzla. Oni žive u predgrađu, zar ne? They live in the suburbs, don't they? They live in the suburbs, don't they? Oni ne žive u predgrađu, oni žive u centru grada. No, they don't live in the suburbs. They live in the city center. No, they don't live in the suburbs. They live in the city center. Oni ne žive u centru grada, zar ne? They don't live in the city center, do they? They don't live in the city center, do they? Da, oni žive u centru grada. Yes, they live in the city center. Yes, they live in the city center. Da, oni zaista žive u centru grada. Yes, they do live in the city center. Yes, they do live in the city center. Gdje živiš ili živite? Where do you live? Where do you live? Gdje oni žive? Where do they live? Where do they live? S kim živiš? S kim živite? Who do you live with? Who do you live with? On živi. He lives. He lives. On živi sa svojom suprugom. He lives with his wife. He lives with his wife. On živi sa svojom djevojkom. He lives with his girlfriend. He lives with his girlfriend. On živi u iznajmljenom stanu. He lives in a rented apartment. He lives in a rented apartment. On živi sam. He lives alone. He lives alone. On ne živi. He doesn't live. He doesn't live. On ne živi na selu. He doesn't live in the country. He doesn't live in the country. On ne živi sa svojim roditeljima. He doesn't live with his parents. He doesn't live with his parents. Da li on živi? Does he live? Does he live? Da, on živi. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Ne, on ne živi. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Da li on živi na selu? Does he live in the country? Does he live in the country? Ne, on ne živi na selu, on živi u gradu. No, he doesn't live in the country. He lives in the city. No, he doesn't live in the country. He lives in the city. Da li on živi sam? Does he live alone? Does he live alone? Ne, on ne živi sam, on živi sa svojim ocem. No, he doesn't live alone. He lives with his father. No, he doesn't live alone. He lives with his father. Gdje on živi? Where does he live? Where does he live? S kim on živi? Who does he live with? Who does he live with? Zar on ne živi u Australiji? Doesn't he live in Australia? Doesn't he live in Australia? On živi u Australiji, zar ne? He lives in Australia, doesn't he? He lives in Australia, doesn't he? On ne živi u Australiji, zar ne? He doesn't live in Australia, does he? He doesn't live in Australia, does he? On zaista živi u Australiji. He does live in Australia. He does live in Australia. Ona živi. She lives. She lives. Ona živi sa svojim suprugom. She lives with her husband. She lives with her husband. Ona živi sama. She lives alone. She lives alone. Ona živi sama sa svoja 2 psa. She lives alone with her 2 dogs. She lives alone with her 2 dogs. Ona živi u gradu. She lives in the city. She lives in the city. Ona živi u iznajmljenom stanu. She lives in a rented apartment. She lives in a rented apartment. Ona ne živi. She doesn't live. She doesn't live. Ona ne živi sama. She doesn't live alone. She doesn't live alone. Ona ne živi na selu. She doesn't live in the country. She doesn't live in the country. Ona ne živi sa svojim suprugom. She doesn't live with her husband. She doesn't live with her husband. Da li ona živi? Does she live? Does she live? Yes. Da, ona živi. Yes, she does. Yes, she does. Ne, ona ne živi. No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't. Da li ona živi sama? Does she live alone? Does she live alone? No, she doesn't live alone. She lives with her best friend. No, she doesn't live alone. She lives with her best friend. Da li ona živi u tvojoj ulici? Does she live in your street? No, she doesn't. Does she live in your street? No, she doesn't. Gdje ona živi? Where does she live? Where does she live? S kim ona živi? Who does she live with? Who does she live with? Zar ona ne živi sa svojim roditeljima? Doesn't she live with her parents? Doesn't she live with her parents? Ne, ona ne živi sa svojim roditeljima, živi sa svojim dečkom. No, she doesn't live with her parents. She lives with her boyfriend. No, she doesn't live with her parents. She lives with her boyfriend. Ona živi u Njemačkoj, zar ne? She lives in Germany, doesn't she? She lives in Germany, doesn't she? Ona ne živi u Njemačkoj, zar ne? She doesn't live in Germany, does she? She doesn't live in Germany, does she? Ona zaista živi u Njemačkoj. She does live in Germany. She does live in Germany. I time smo došli do kraja još jedne lekcije na ovom kanalu. U narednoj lekciji počet ćemo da radimo drugo sadašnje vrijeme u engleskom jeziku, takozvani present continuous ili present progressive. Do tada svakako bi bilo dobro, ukoliko želite da nešto obradimo na ovom kanalu, da nam to pišete u komentarima i da svakako ne zaboravite zapratiti kanal. Toliko za sada, ja vas sve lijepo pozdravljam i vidimo se uskoro.